The snow had already started when I fell. I remember that part clearly, the way the flakes were coming down soft and slow outside the tall windows of St. Andrew's, the kind of snow that looks peaceful from inside a warm building. I'd been sitting in my usual pew, third from the front on the left side, the same spot I've sat every Sunday for 31 years. The organ had just started. It was, "How Great Thou Art," I think. And then something shifted in my chest. Not pain, exactly. More like a door slamming shut inside me. The next thing I knew, I was looking up at the ceiling. Someone was pressing their hands on my sternum. I heard a woman crying somewhere behind me. Then the paramedics came through the side door, the cold air rushing in with them, and I thought, my son doesn't know. Someone needs to call my son. They told me later that the emergency room doctor tried to reach him 14 times in the first hour alone. 14 times. In 1 hour. I keep thinking about that. 14 calls. My son is 38 years old. He has a good phone, I know, because I helped him pick it out last Christmas. It has a ringtone loud enough to wake the neighbors. He told me that himself, laughing about it over dinner at my kitchen table. He didn't answer. Not once. I didn't know any of this while it was happening. I was sedated by then, a machine doing part of the breathing for me, tubes in my arm, and a nurse named, and I'll always remember her name, a nurse named Teresa who held my hand when they moved me to the cardiac unit. She had cold fingers and warm eyes, and she told me she'd try to reach my emergency contact herself. My emergency contact is my son. She tried him 4 more times. Nothing. I am 64 years old. I was born in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I have lived most of my adult life in a small city in Ontario, the kind of place where people still shovel their neighbor's walk without being asked. I worked for 30 years as a school librarian. I raised 2 children, my son and a daughter who moved to Vancouver when she was 26 and has built a life there that I'm proud of, even when I miss her. My husband, God rest him, passed 7 years ago from pancreatic cancer. It was fast and it was brutal, and my son was wonderful during that time. He came home from Calgary for 3 weeks. He sat with his father. He held my hand in the hospital waiting room. He cried and he let me see him cry, which felt like a gift. I thought I knew who my son was. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I thought I knew him. After the funeral, after the estate was settled, after I sold the house we'd raised our children in and moved to a smaller place near the river, a condo with a balcony where I grow tomatoes every summer, my son moved back to Ontario. Not to be near me, I came to understand gradually. He moved for work. He'd gotten a position with a construction management firm in Mississauga, and suddenly he was 40 minutes away instead of 4 flights. I told myself this was a blessing. For the first year, it felt like one. He came for Sunday dinners most weeks. He helped me carry boxes when I moved. He fixed the leaking tap in my bathroom and complained cheerfully about it the whole time, and I made him his favorite, shepherd's pie, and we sat at my small table and talked about his father and the future. Then he met her. I want to be careful here because I am not the kind of woman who blames a daughter-in-law for everything. I know that's a tired story. I know mothers-in-law have been the villain in it for centuries, so I want to say plainly that I tried. I invited her to Christmas. I complimented the dish she brought to Thanksgiving. It was a butternut squash thing, and it was actually quite good. I asked her questions about her work. I remembered her mother's name. But something changed after they got serious. My son started canceling Sunday dinners. He stopped answering texts the same day. When I called, I often got voicemail, and the callbacks came at strange hours, 9 at night when I was already in my housecoat, as if he were squeezing me in somewhere between other things. Last spring, he told me they were thinking about buying a house. I offered to help. Not with money. I didn't have the kind of money that would make a real difference in this housing market, even in a smaller city. But I offered to help look, to go to open houses with them, to share what I knew about the neighborhoods. I raised him here. I know which streets flood in March and which ones are near good schools and which ones have noise from the highway that the listings never mention. He said he'd let me know. He did not let me know. They bought a house in June. a semi-detached in a neighborhood I've driven through maybe 3 times in my life. I found out when he texted me a photo of the front door with a key emoji. I sat with that for a long time. I'm telling you all of this because I need you to understand that what happened in November didn't come out of nowhere. It came at the end of a road I'd been walking for a while, watching things get smaller and further away and not quite being able to name what I was losing. My daughter called me every Sunday without fail. My daughter, living 3,000 kilometers away in Vancouver, called me every single Sunday, and we talked for an hour sometimes about books in her garden and the rain and what I was reading and whether I was eating enough. She sent me packages, a jar of local honey, a tin of tea from a shop near her office, once a small watercolor she'd found at a market that she said reminded her of our old backyard. She is the one who was frightened when she couldn't reach me that Sunday in November. She is the one who called the church. She is the one who, after not being able to get through to her brother, called every hospital in the city until she found out where I was. I didn't know any of that either until later. I was unconscious. I missed the whole drama of my own emergency, which I suppose is what you do. I woke up on the second day. That's not quite right. I surfaced and went under several times, apparently. But the moment I actually registered as being awake, it was Tuesday afternoon. There was pale light coming through the window blind. The television on the wall was off. There was a plant on the windowsill that I didn't recognize, a small succulent in a terracotta pot, and for a long, strange moment, I thought I was somewhere else entirely. Then I saw the heart monitor and I remembered. Teresa, the nurse with the cold fingers, was there. She told me I'd had a cardiac event, that they'd had to act quickly, that I was stable now. She said it kindly, like she'd been saying those words all her life, which I suppose she had. "Is my son here?" I asked. There was a pause that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but I've thought about those 2 seconds many times since. "We weren't able to reach him," she said. "But your daughter called. She knows you're here. She's been calling to check on you every few hours." I closed my eyes. My daughter in Vancouver, calling every few hours, and my son, 40 minutes away, who had not answered a single one of the 31 calls the hospital had placed to his number over 2 days. 31 calls. I didn't cry right away. I was too tired for crying. I just lay there with that number settling into me like cold water. He showed up on the 3rd day. I was sitting up by then, eating something that was supposedly chicken soup, watching the snow fall outside the window. Different snow from the kind that had come down at the church. This was heavier and meaner, the kind that stays. When I heard his voice in the corridor, he came in looking tired and apologetic and carrying a plastic bag from the Tim Hortons across the street. He brought me a tea and a chocolate glazed donut, as if that were a thing that would help. "Mom," he said. "God, Mom, I'm so sorry. Things were crazy. You were where?" I asked. He set the bag down on the chair. "We went to Collingwood. We had the trip planned for months. I didn't have my phone on properly. The volume was. The hospital called you 31 times, I said. He looked at the floor. "The doctor called you 31 times in 2 days, I said, while I was unconscious after a cardiac arrest, and you didn't answer." "Mom, were you in Collingwood when they called the first time?" He didn't answer. He sat down in the chair beside my bed, and he put his elbows on his knees, and he looked at the floor, and I looked at the side of his face and tried to find the boy I raised in it. "What was it?" I said. "A ski weekend?" "It was at Chalet. We'd rented it since we'd paid the deposit months ago." "Did you know?" I asked. And I wasn't angry when I asked it. I was past the anger already into something quieter and more permanent. "Did you see the calls and choose not to answer?" He didn't say yes. He also didn't say no. My neighbor had a key to my condo. Her name is Wilda. She's 71, a retired occupational therapist, and she lives 2 doors down. We share a balcony wall, and in the summers we talk over it about our tomato plants and complain together about the building's parking situation. We are not close friends, exactly. We're something better than that. We're reliable to each other. When I got home from the hospital, my daughter had flown in by then, arrived the day before my discharge, appearing at my bedside in her good coat with her carry-on bag and her eyes red from the flight. It was Wilda who had stocked my fridge. Milk, eggs, good soup from the deli, 2 streets over, a container of my favorite yogurt. She'd also put fresh flowers on my kitchen counter, yellow tulips, even though it was November and they must have cost her twice the summer price. She'd come every day while I was in the hospital. Every single day. When I thanked her properly after I was settled back home and my daughter had made tea and we were all sitting in my small living room, Wilda just shook her head. "You do the same?" she said. And she was right. I would. That's the thing about the people who show up. They don't think they're doing anything extraordinary. They just come. My daughter stayed for 10 days. She slept on my pull-out couch without a word of complaint. She cooked for me. Not fancy things, but good things. The things a body needs after it's been through something. Roast chicken, lentil soup, oatmeal with real maple syrup. She went with me to my follow-up appointment and sat in the room and asked the cardiologist the questions I forgot to ask. She made a list of my medications on an index card and taped it to the inside of my kitchen cupboard. She also helped me make some decisions, not right away. She didn't push. She just sat with me in the evenings, after dinner, when the city outside was dark and quiet, and she let me talk. She's always been a good listener, my daughter. She takes after her father that way. I told her about the Sunday dinners that stopped, about the house they bought without telling me, about the 7 months of voicemails and late callbacks and feeling myself being slowly moved to the edge of my son's life like a piece of furniture he didn't know what to do with. She listened to all of it. Then she said very quietly, "Mom, what do you want?" I thought about it for a long time. Outside the window, a streetlight was making a yellow circle in the snow. "I want to stop waiting," I said. I had made a will after my husband died. It was a straightforward document. My estate split equally between my 2 children, my personal effects divided as I saw fit, my condo to be sold and the proceeds distributed. Standard. Fair. What a mother does. I called my lawyer in December. She is a practical woman named, and I won't use her name here, it's not my story to share, a practical woman I've trusted for 15 years. I told her what had happened. I told her all of it, the way I've told you, plainly, without drama, because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "So you want to revise the distribution?" "Yes," I said. "All of it or just the proportion?" I thought about the tulips on my kitchen counter. I thought about my daughter's red eyes at the airport after a red-eye flight from Vancouver. I thought about Wilda, who had a key to my home and used it when it mattered. "I'd like to leave the bulk of the estate to my daughter," I said. "And I'd like to leave something meaningful to my neighbor. She's been family to me, in the way that counts." My lawyer typed for a moment. "And your son?" I looked out the window of her office at the gray December sky. "A nominal amount," I said, "enough that he knows he was considered, not enough that he profits from having been absent." She didn't flinch. She just typed. "I haven't told my son about the change. He called me in January, the month after, when I think it finally occurred to him that something had shifted. He called on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual, and his voice had a different quality to it. Careful. He asked how I was feeling. He asked about my medication. He mentioned very casually that he and his wife had been thinking about coming for a visit. I said that would be nice. He asked if there was anything I needed. "I'm fine," I said. "Wilda and I have been managing well." There was a pause. "Wilda and I have been managing well." There was a pause. "Wilda, your neighbor?" "She's been wonderful," I said. "She drives me to appointments. She checks in every day. I honestly don't know what I would have done without her." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mom," he said, "about the hospital. I think we should talk about it, about what happened. I know you're probably upset, and I get it, I do. But I want you to understand that it was a terrible situation, and I feel awful about it. And I know you feel awful, I said. So can we? I'm not sure feeling awful changes anything, I said. But I appreciate the call. I kept my voice gentle, not cold, not punishing, just honest. The anger had burned through months ago, and what was left was something much cleaner. A kind of clarity. He said he'd call again soon. He hasn't yet. I've been thinking a lot lately about what makes someone family. I used to think it was blood. Automatically. The people you share a last name with, the ones in the photographs on your mantle. And maybe once, for a long time, that was enough of an answer. But I lay in a hospital bed for 2 days, and the person who came was not the one I expected. My daughter came, yes, but she had to fly across the country to do it, and she did it without hesitating. And Wilda came, and she brought tulips in November. My son was 40 minutes away. He did not come. At some point during my recovery, when I was still moving slowly and my chest still ached if I pushed too hard, I was sitting on my balcony in the thin winter sun, bundled up, ridiculous looking, just needing the outside air, and Wilda came out to her side and we sat together across the low wall between us, drinking tea and not talking for a while. The river was frozen. The sky was the color of old pewter. "You doing okay?" she said eventually. "I think so," I said. "You seem steadier. I feel steadier." She nodded, satisfied with that. We drank our tea. "You know," she said, "my son is in Halifax, calls me every Sunday without fail. Couldn't come when I broke my wrist last spring, not right away. He had work, he had the kids, but he called every morning, asked every question, didn't let me handle it alone, even from a distance. I thought about my own daughter, her Sunday calls. He came the following weekend," Wilda said, "drove 12 hours, brought the grandchildren." "That's a good son," I said. "It is," she agreed. She looked at the frozen river. "Presence doesn't always look the same, but it always looks like something. I've thought about that almost every day since. This spring, I'm planning a trip. My daughter wants me to come to Vancouver for a month. She has a guest room with a window that looks out over a small garden, and she says the cherry blossoms in April are worth the trip alone. She's already looked into cardiac rehab programs in her area, just in case, practical as always. I've booked the flight. One way, initially. I might stay longer than a month. I'm not sure yet. The condo will be fine. Wilda has the key. I'm also going to see more of my city before I leave. I've lived here long enough to know it well, but lately I've been wanting to see it like someone who's been given something back, which I suppose I have. There's a concert series at the church hall I've been avoiding since my husband died because some things can feel too loaded. I'm going to go. I'm going to sit in a pew and let the music happen to me. 31 calls. I still think about that number sometimes when I'm falling asleep. Not with bitterness, not anymore. More like a fact I've learned to carry, the way you carry any truth that changes things permanently. The phone rang 31 times in 2 days while I was lying in a hospital bed, and the person 40 minutes away let it ring, and the person 30,000 kilometers away got on an airplane. I think I know who my family is. I think I've known for longer than I admitted. And I kept the $95,000. I kept it, and I'm going to Vancouver in April, and the cherry blossoms will be extraordinary, and my daughter will meet me at the airport in her good coat, and we will go home together. That is enough. More than enough. It's everything. I've lived long enough to know that most of the important things in life don't announce themselves. They don't come with warning signs or a clear moment where you think, this is it. This is the one that changes everything. They arrive quietly, a phone that doesn't ring back, a plastic bag from Tim Hortons, yellow tulips on a kitchen counter in November, and you only understand what they meant later, when you're sitting still enough to see the whole shape of things. What happened to me wasn't extraordinary. Cardiac events happen to people every day. Children fail their parents every day. Neighbors show up or they don't. These are ordinary human situations. But I think that's exactly why they matter, because ordinary is where we actually live, not in the grand gestures, in the 31 calls, in whether or not you answer. I've thought a lot about what it takes to become the kind of person who answers, and I don't think it's talent or luck or even love exactly. I think it's a choice that gets made slowly, over years, in small moments where no one is watching. My neighbor Wilda didn't show up for me because she's a remarkable person, though she is. She showed up because she'd been practicing showing up her whole life. For her patients when she was working, for her own family, for the people 2 doors down who she shares a balcony wall with and talks to about tomatoes in the summer. Presence is a habit, and so is absence. My son didn't fail me in November because he's a bad person. I want to be honest about that, because the easy version of this story makes him a villain, and I don't think that's true. I think he'd been practicing a different habit for a long time, the habit of putting distance between himself and anything that felt like obligation, like weight, like need. And when the moment came where it truly counted, that habit answered for him. Not cruelty, just the accumulated result of 1,000 small choices to look away. That's what I mean about consequences being built slowly. We don't usually get one catastrophic moral test that defines us. We get years of smaller ones, and who we are in the big moment is almost always just who we've already been, in all the quiet moments before it. The harder question, the one I've sat with on my balcony through a long Ontario winter, is what I do with that understanding, because knowing why something happened doesn't make it hurt less. But it does make it clearer. And clarity, I've found, is the beginning of every real decision I've ever made. I revised my will. I booked a flight. I let myself be taken care of by the people who had already been taking care of me without my fully noticing. And I stopped waiting for my son to become someone he had not yet chosen to be. That last part was the hardest, because hope is not a small thing to put down. But I've learned, slowly, the way you learn anything that costs you, that holding on to the wrong hope can keep you from seeing the real thing when it's standing right in front of you, with cold fingers and warm eyes, or yellow tulips in November. I'm going to Vancouver in April. My daughter will meet me at the airport. That's who I am now. And it's enough. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just listened to my daughter's voice on the phone, thin as paper, telling me she was sitting on a bench outside the Roundhouse Community Center in Y'alltown with her 2 little ones and a duffel bag, and I said, "Stay there. Don't move. I'm coming." It was a Tuesday in late October. I remember because I had just finished pruning back the hydrangeas in front of my place on West 14th in Kitsilano, and my hands still smelled like wet leaves and bark. The rain was starting up the way it does in Vancouver in October. That soft kind that you don't really notice until your collar is soaked through. I went inside, washed my hands, took off my gardening jeans, and put on the navy blazer my late husband bought me from Holt Renfrew about 12 years ago. Then I called my driver, Henrik, and told him to bring the car around. I am 68 years old. I have one daughter, Rosalind. She married a man named Brennan 8 years ago, and from the moment I shook her mother-in-law's hand at the rehearsal dinner, I knew. You know how women know things about other women. The way she held her glass, the way she looked at my daughter when my daughter wasn't looking. Pleasant on the surface. Underneath, something else. I didn't say anything at the wedding. I am not a woman who interferes. My own mother taught me that a wife's troubles are a wife's troubles, and if a daughter wants her mother's help, she'll ask for it. So I waited. For 8 years, I waited. For 8 years, I waited. I watched. I sent the grandkids birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside. I came for Thanksgiving, and at Christmas, I made the tourtière the way my own grandmother made it back in Trois-Rivières. I stayed in my lane. But that Tuesday on the phone, when Rosalind said the words, "She framed me," and her voice cracked on the word framed, I understood that the waiting was over. Henrik drove me down Burrard, across the bridge, and along Pacific Boulevard. Through the windshield wipers, I could see the False Creek seawall, joggers in their toques and rain shells, the seaplanes on the water. I didn't say anything to Henrik. He's been with me for 11 years, since before my husband passed. He knows when not to talk. We pulled up across from the roundhouse. I saw her before she saw me. My Rosalind, 36 years old, sitting hunched on a wet bench with her knees pulled together. My grandson, Theo, who is 6, was leaning into her side with his little blue backpack on his lap. My granddaughter, Renly, who is 4.5, was holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, half asleep on Rosalind's shoulder. There were 4 hard-shell suitcases at their feet. 4. Not 2. Not a weekender. 4. I crossed the street. Rosalind looked up. Her mascara was halfway down her face. She tried to stand, and the rabbit fell out of Renly's hand, and Renly started crying, and Theo just stared at me with the kind of quiet that children get when they have stopped understanding the adults in their life. "Mom," Rosalind said, and her voice broke open completely. I picked up the rabbit. I handed it back to Renly. I put my hand on Theo's head, just for a second, and said, "Hello, my love." Then I said, "Henrik, take the suitcases." Rosalind was saying something, fast, all at once. She told Brennan I was stealing from the firm. Mom, she had documents, she had numbers. He believed her. He wouldn't even let me into the house to get my things. His mother had movers there by 10 this morning. I have nowhere to. I put 2 fingers against her lips, just gently, the way I used to do when she was 4 and overwhelmed. "Not here," I said. "In the car." We drove back across the bridge. Renly fell asleep almost instantly with her cheek against the window. Theo held my hand on the back seat the whole way and didn't say one word. Rosalind cried quietly into a tissue I gave her from my purse. I didn't ask any questions. There would be time. At the house, I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from the can because that is what my grandchildren needed, and I put them in the guest room with the trundle bed and the books that used to be Rosalind's. Then I came back downstairs and poured my daughter a glass of cold milk because she has always settled with cold milk ever since she was small, and I sat across from her at the kitchen table and I said, "Now, tell me everything." She told me. She'd been working for the past 3 years at her mother-in-law's company. It is a real estate development firm headquartered in a building on West Hastings, one of those mid-rise glass towers near Waterfront Station. Her mother-in-law is named Constance. Constance built the firm with her late husband in the 90s, took it over fully when he died of a stroke about 15 years back, and has been running it ever since, like a woman who has never been told no in her life. Rosalind worked as the firm's communications director. Brennan worked there too, as a junior partner under his mother. Rosalind told me she had been seeing things for the last 1.5 years. Numbers that didn't reconcile. Invoices to a numbered company in Surrey for consulting work that, as far as Rosalind could tell, had never actually been done. Wire transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. Land deals where the property had been bought, flipped within 90 days through a shell company, and then sold again at 3 times the price to a buyer who, when Rosalind searched, didn't appear to exist on any government registry. She had been quietly photocopying. 6 weeks, Mom, she said, holding her milk with both hands. I've had a banker's box of copies in a storage unit in Burnaby for 6 weeks. I was going to take it to the RCMP Commercial Crime Unit. I had an appointment for next Monday. Then what happened? Constance found out. How? Rosalind looked at the table. I told Brennan last Saturday night. I thought he's my husband, Mom. I thought he should know what his mother was doing. I thought he would want to know what his mother was doing. I thought he would want to know. I thought we would go to the RCMP together. I closed my eyes for half a second. I did not say what I was thinking, which was, "Oh, my sweet girl." Then I opened my eyes and I said, "He told her." She nodded. And then she fabricated a paper trail, Rosalind said, and now she was speaking in the flat voice people use when they have already accepted something. Showed him bank statements with my name on them, wire transfers from the firm's operating account into a personal account she'd opened in my name without my knowing. Created a forensic accounting report by some firm I've never heard of, dated 3 weeks ago, concluding that I had embezzled $478,000 over the past 2 years. Brennan came home Sunday morning, Mom. He came home Sunday morning and he said, "My mother showed me everything." He wouldn't look at me. He told me to pack a bag. When I tried to argue, he said the movers were coming Monday and that he was filing for full custody on grounds of financial misconduct. I sat very still. "He took my keys," she said. He changed the locks while I was at the storage unit yesterday trying to retrieve my banker's box. The box was gone, Mom. The unit had been emptied. I don't know how she found out about the unit. I rented it under a different name. I paid cash. Brennan, I said, he has access to your accounts. He would have seen the auto pay for a storage unit you never mentioned. She closed her eyes. I'm so stupid. You are not stupid. You trusted your husband. That is not stupid. That is what a marriage is supposed to be. She started crying again, the quiet kind, the kind where the shoulders barely move. I let her cry. I drank a glass of water. I looked out the kitchen window at my back garden where the last of the dahlias were going brown in the rain, and I thought about Constance. Here is what Constance does not know. 11 years ago, when my husband was sick and we were getting our affairs in order, he and I sat down with our investment advisor and we restructured everything. My husband had spent 41 years in commercial real estate. He started out as a mortgage broker in the late 70s, and by the time he died, he had a portfolio of holdings across Greater Vancouver, the Fraser Valley, and a few properties on Vancouver Island that he had quietly bought up in the late 80s for nothing and held. He never advertised any of it. He never went to galas. He never wanted his name on a building. He used to say to me, "The loudest people in this city own the least." When he died, he left everything in a numbered holding company that I am the sole director of. I have never told my daughter the full picture because my husband and I agreed that she would be told piece by piece as she grew into it. She knew there was money. She did not know how much. And she did not know that one of the buildings in the holding company's portfolio, a mid-rise glass tower on West Hastings, was the building that Constance's firm has leased the top 3 floors of for the last 7 years. Constance pays rent every month to a numbered company. She has never bothered to find out who the numbered company belongs to. Why would she? The check clears. I am the landlord of my daughter's mother-in-law. I poured my daughter another glass of milk. I said, "Rosalind, go to bed. Sleep next to the children. We will talk in the morning." She looked at me. There was something in her face. She has always been able to read me the way I could read my mother. "Mom," she said, "don't do anything tonight. I'm not going to do anything tonight." "I'm not going to do anything tonight," I said. "I'm going to do it correctly." I sat in my husband's old office for most of the night. I called my lawyer at home. Marjorie has been my lawyer for 19 years, and she does not mind a call at 10 p.m., and I told her what I needed. I called my forensic accountant, a man named Wendell who used to work for the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions in Ottawa before he retired and started taking private clients. I called Henrik and told him I would need him very early in the morning. I called the property manager for the West Hastings building. I called a private investigator named Rain, a Quebecaise woman I have used twice before for a property dispute, who is very thorough and very quiet. And then I made a cup of tea, and I sat by the window, and I waited for the sun to come up over the North Shore Mountains. I am not a vengeful woman. I want to be clear about that. I have been hurt in my life, and I have, on the whole, let it pass. My husband used to say I had the longest fuse of any woman he ever met. But there is a difference between an insult and an attack on my child. There is a difference between unkindness and a calculated effort to destroy a young mother and take her children away from her with forged documents. That is not a slight, that is war. And if a woman comes for my daughter and my grandchildren, then she has chosen what comes next, and I am only an instrument of her choice. The next morning, Wednesday, I had Wendell come to the house at 7. I made him eggs. He brought his laptop and a small printer, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I told him everything Rosalind had told me the night before. He took notes. He asked precise questions. Rosalind came downstairs at about 8, in one of my old housecoats with Renly on her hip. She stopped in the doorway when she saw Wendell. "This is Mr. Lawfrey," I said. "He is going to help us. Rosalind, I need you to tell him exactly what you saw and exactly what documents you copied, to the best of your memory. He will not write down your name. He will not file anything yet. He just needs to know." She nodded. I took Renly from her, and I took Theo by the hand when he padded in a minute later, and I made them pancakes while my daughter sat at the dining room table with a forensic accountant and described line by line 6 weeks of evidence she had memorized. By Wednesday afternoon, Ryan was in Burnaby pulling the security camera footage from the storage facility. By Wednesday evening, she had identified the man who had emptied the unit on Monday morning. He was an employee of Constance's firm, a nephew actually, married into the family. He had used a key. The storage facility had a record of someone calling on Sunday afternoon, claiming to be Rosalind, asking to add a second authorized user to the unit. The voice on the phone had been a woman's. Constance had called herself. Renee got me the recording. Marjorie, my lawyer, by Thursday morning had drafted 3 documents. The first was a notice to Constance's firm, as the tenant of the West Hastings building, of a material breach of their commercial lease, specifically the morality clause, which prohibits the tenant from engaging in any activity on the premises that could bring the property into disrepute or attract criminal investigation. The second was a 30-day notice to vacate. The third was a comprehensive package to be hand-delivered to the RCMP Commercial Crime Unit on Friday morning, containing copies of every photocopy Rosalind had made. She had, smart girl, kept a backup in a safety deposit box at a Vancity branch on Commercial Drive that Brennan did not know existed. Wendell's preliminary analysis, the storage facility footage, the audio recording of Constance impersonating my daughter on the phone, and a sworn affidavit from Rosalind detailing what she had observed. Marjorie also drafted a letter to Brennan's lawyer, because of course he had retained one, withdrawing any cooperation with his custody filing, demanding immediate return of my daughter's personal belongings, and informing him that a forensic accounting firm with 26 years of standing would be providing expert testimony in any custody proceeding, that the documents his client had relied upon to characterize my daughter as a thief were fabricated. We attached a preliminary report. I did not file any of this on Thursday. I waited until Friday morning. On Friday morning, I drove to the West Hastings building. Henrik dropped me at the front entrance. I went up to the 23rd floor, which is the floor that houses the executive offices of Constance's firm. I had never been inside. I had owned the building for 11 years, and I had never set foot inside the offices of my tenant. The reception was very modern, very glass, very designed. The young woman at the desk looked up. "I'm here to see Constance," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Tell her that her landlord is here?" The young woman blinked. "I'm sorry, Tell her exactly that, word for word. Her landlord is here. She'll understand." The young woman picked up the phone. I sat down on the white leather sofa. I crossed my ankles. I looked at the rain on the windows. I could see the cranes on the waterfront and the Burrard Inlet beyond, and the mountains and the morning ferries crossing toward Bowen Island. It is a beautiful view. My husband chose this building partly for the view. 3 minutes later, Constance came out of the back hallway. She was wearing a dove gray suit and pearls. She is 64. She is the kind of woman who has been told her whole life that she is striking. She is striking. I will give her that. "I'm sorry," she said in the bright voice she uses for people she does not know. "I think there's been some confusion. We deal with our landlord through our property." "Sit down," I said. She stopped. The young receptionist looked between us. "Sit down, Constance," I said. "I am Rosalind's mother. I think you know who Rosalind is." Her face changed, very slightly, the way a window changes when a cloud passes. She sat. I opened my purse. I took out a manila envelope. I set it on the glass coffee table between us. I did not push it toward her. I let it sit there. "Inside that envelope," I said, "you will find 3 items. The first is a notice of material breach of your commercial lease. The second is a 30-day notice to vacate this building, served as of today, Friday. The third is a copy, only a copy, the originals are with my lawyer, of a forensic report, a recording of you impersonating my daughter on the telephone with a storage facility in Burnaby on Sunday afternoon, and a list of every wire transfer to your numbered company in Surrey going back 41 months. The originals of all of this, along with my daughter's sworn affidavit and the photocopy she made of your books, will be hand-delivered to the RCMP Commercial Crime Unit at 11 o'clock this morning. It is currently 9:46. She didn't move. Her face had gone very still. You have a number of choices to make in the next hour, I said. Most of them are not good choices. I am not here to advise you. I am here because I wanted you to know, before the rest of your life happens to you, who you decided to come for. She tried, then. I'll give her that too. She tried. And I'll give her that too. She tried. Whatever Rosalind has told you, Constance, I said, stop. I am not interested in a conversation. I have had a long life. I have buried a husband. I have made my peace with most of the people who have tried to take things from me. But you tried to take my grandchildren from my daughter. You forged documents, and you turned a young woman's husband against her, and you put her on a bench in the rain in Yaletown with 2 little ones and 4 suitcases. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about a 4-year-old girl with a stuffed rabbit in the rain on a bench. That is what you did. That is the thing you did. She started to speak. I am not finished, I said. She closed her mouth. The lease is over, I said. 30 days. You will not negotiate. You will not appeal. You will be out of this building by the end of November. I am not interested in your apologies, and I am not interested in your settlement. You may speak with the RCMP at your convenience. I imagine they will have many questions. As for your son, my daughter's husband, I have no opinion on him. He will have to live with what he believed and what he chose to believe, and what kind of man that makes him. That is between him and his conscience. I stood up. One last thing, I said. I leaned down slightly, not threatening, just close enough that she would hear. My husband bought this building in 1994, I said. He paid $2.1 million for it. You have paid me, over the last 7 years, rent of approximately $14.6 million in a building you assumed was owned by a faceless numbered company you never bothered to look into. I have, with the greatest pleasure, used a portion of that rent every quarter to fund my granddaughter's respart, the little girl on the bench, the one with the rabbit. You have, in effect, been paying for her university education for 7 years. I wanted you to know that, too. I walked out. In the elevator going down, I started to shake, very slightly, the way I used to shake after my husband's surgeries, when the adrenaline left me and the body remembered what it had just been through. Henrik was waiting at the curb. He opened the door. He did not ask. I sat in the back seat and I closed my eyes and I said, "Home, please." By Friday evening, the RCMP had executed a search warrant on the offices on West Hastings. By Saturday, Brennan had been suspended from the firm pending investigation. By Sunday, his lawyer had called Marjorie to ask, very politely, whether there was any possibility of withdrawing the custody filing. Marjorie told him there was a possibility and that the conditions of that possibility would be communicated in writing. By Monday, my daughter's belongings were returned to my house in 3 rented trucks. By the following Friday, Constance had been charged with fraud over $5,000, uttering forged documents and obstruction of justice. By the end of November, her firm had vacated the 23rd floor. By Christmas, the case was the lead story in the business section of the Globe and Mail. I did not give an interview. Brennan tried to come to the house once in early December. I met him at the door. I did not let him in. I told him that Rosalind would communicate with him only through her lawyer regarding the children, and that I would not be discussing his mother or his marriage with him, and that I hoped, for the sake of my grandchildren, that he would find a way to become a better man than he had so far shown himself to be. I closed the door. He did not come back. Rosalind and the children stayed with me through that winter. We put a small Christmas tree in the front room, and Theo helped me with the lights. Renly named the rabbit Maple after the syrup because she had decided that was the proper name for a Canadian rabbit. In the spring, Rosalind enrolled in a program at SFU to finish her master's. By summer, she had her own little house on West 8th, 3 blocks from me, with a yard for the kids and a magnolia tree out front. I went back one afternoon in late August to the bench outside the roundhouse. I parked where Henrik had parked that October morning, and I walked across the wet grass to the spot. There were two teenagers eating poutine from a paper container. I sat down beside them. They didn't notice me. I sat for a while and watched the seaplanes come in over False Creek, the way I'd watched them out of the car window almost a year before, and I thought about how the world reshapes itself when you are not looking, how everything that you have built can hold, even when you didn't know you would need it to. How my husband all those years ago, sitting at our kitchen table with the investment advisor, said, "Just in case, my love, just in case." How a building bought in 1994 by a quiet man in the commercial real estate business in Vancouver had, 3 decades later, been the lever that lifted my daughter and my grandchildren out of a wet bench in the rain. I want to say something now to whoever is listening. If you are a woman and you have a daughter and you have ever felt that something is wrong in her household and you have stayed quiet because you did not want to interfere, pay attention. Quiet does not mean blind. Restraint does not mean inaction. You can hold your tongue for years and still be preparing the ground. My husband and I prepared the ground for 31 years. We did not know we were doing it for this, but that is what preparation is. You do not know what you are preparing for. You only know that you are building something that your children will need someday in a way that you cannot predict. And if you are a woman in trouble, if your husband has stopped looking at you and your mother-in-law has started smiling at you in a way that does not reach her eyes, and you have started seeing numbers that do not add up, document everything. Make copies. Store them somewhere your husband does not know about, and do not, under any circumstances, tell him what you are doing until you have already walked into the police station with a banker's box. I do not say this from anger. I say it from love. I am 68 years old. I have learned that love, real love, the kind that lasts past a wedding and into the long, quiet years, is not the love that whispers pretty things. It is the love that prepares. It is the love that prepares. It is the love that watches the road. It is the love that when the call comes from a bench in the rain, gets in the car. You are not catastrophizing. You are not imagining it. You do not need to wait for someone to find you. I found my daughter. And if I had to do it all over again, I would have parked sooner. I would have crossed the street sooner. I would have crossed the street sooner. I would have picked up that rabbit 10 years before I did. But here is the thing about being a mother. You do not get to pick when you are needed. You only get to make sure that when you are needed, you are ready. I was ready. And so, my love, whoever you are listening tonight, you can be ready too. I have been thinking a great deal this past year about the small choices we make decades before we know what they are for. My husband and I sat at our kitchen table in 1994 and signed papers on a tired little building on West Hastings because he had a feeling about the block. That was all. A feeling. He did not say to me that night, "One day, this will save our daughter." He couldn't have known. I couldn't have known. We were a young couple looking at a mortgage, talking quietly so we wouldn't wake Rosalind, who was sleeping down the hall with her thumb in her mouth. And yet 30 years later, that same building was the lever that pried my grandchildren out of the rain. Cause and effect. Quiet seed, late harvest. I think Constance forgot, somewhere along the way, that every choice carries a bill. She thought she could forge her way past consequence. She mistook her own cleverness for safety. But cleverness without character is only a faster road to your own undoing. And a woman who is willing to break a young mother in order to protect her own reputation is a woman who has already, in the most important sense, lost everything she was trying to keep. She just hadn't been told yet. The RCMP told her, eventually. The Globe and Mail told her. But she had told herself first, the moment she picked up that phone on Sunday and pretended to be my daughter. That was the moment her life turned. Rosalind, my Rosalind, she taught me something too. For 6 weeks, alone, frightened, doubting herself, she still made copies. She still kept a backup at the Vancity branch on Commercial Drive. She did not know if she would survive what was coming, but she prepared anyway. That, I have decided, is what nerve actually looks like. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that gets up in the morning and goes to the photocopier one more time because the truth is worth something, even when no one is watching. If I could pass anything on to a younger woman watching this, and I suspect there are some, I would say this. Build your character the way you build a foundation, slowly, without anyone clapping for you. Sharpen your mind by paying attention to the things that don't quite add up, because the world is always whispering the truth to you if you are willing to hear it. And when the moment comes, and it will come, find your nerve. Not the shouting kind, the standing kind. The kind that picks up a stuffed rabbit from a wet bench and hands it back to a 4-year-old without trembling. We do not choose the storms. We only choose, long before they arrive, what kind of woman will be standing in them. I spotted my granddaughter first. She was sitting on a bench outside the Tim Hortons on Queensway, the one near the old library. She had a paper cup in both hands and she wasn't drinking it. She was just holding it, like she needed something warm to hold on to. My daughter was beside her, back straight, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. 2 rolling suitcases at their feet, a reusable grocery bag stuffed so full the zipper had given up halfway. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a moment before I got out. I needed that moment, because I recognized that posture. I'd worn it myself once, 34 years ago, standing outside a Shoppers Drug Mart in the January cold, with nowhere to go and too much pride to say so. I got out of the car. My daughter looked up. She tried to smile and couldn't quite finish it. I said, "Put the bags in the trunk." She started to say something. I don't know what, probably an explanation, probably an apology. And I said, "We'll talk at the house. Put the bags in the trunk." My granddaughter asked if we were going to Grandma's house, and I said yes. We were going to Grandma's house, and there was leftover butter chicken in the fridge, and we could watch whatever she wanted on TV. She seemed satisfied with that. Children are sometimes easier than adults. My daughter didn't say anything for most of the drive. I didn't push. I've learned at 67 that silence in a car is not always a bad thing. Sometimes people need to watch the city go by for a little while before they can find the words. We crossed the bridge over the creek and she finally said, "He told me my family was the problem. He said his father had always thought so." I kept my eyes on the road. "He said it to my face, Mom, in front of Lily." I said, "I know." She turned to look at me. "You knew?" I suspected. "I know." She turned to look at me. "You knew?" I suspected. There's a difference, but yes, I had a feeling. She was quiet again. "Then he fired me. Or his father did, technically. My name's on the company, but his father controls the board. They said there was a restructuring." "When?" "Thursday." It was Saturday. She'd waited 2 days to call me. I thought about that, and then I let it go. She's 36 years old, and she's stubborn, and she gets that from her father's side, and there's no point arguing with whether. "Okay," I said. "Okay, Mom, I have $400 in my checking account. The mortgage payment comes out on the 15th. I know when the 15th is. I don't know what to do." I turned onto my street and pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. The neighbors had their Christmas lights still up even though it was March, which I've always found cheerful rather than lazy. "I do," I said. "Come inside. I should explain something about my son-in-law's family before I explain what happened next." The Whitmore family, that's what I'll call them here, had been in the Niagara region for 3 generations. His grandfather had started a small commercial refrigeration business. His father, Clement, had turned it into a mid-sized logistics and cold storage company with contracts across southern Ontario and into Quebec. They owned 4 warehouses. They had 60-something employees. They were, by their own accounting, a success story. My daughter had met the son, Gregory, at a professional association dinner in Hamilton 8 years ago. She was a project manager at the time. He was charming, which is a word I've learned to treat with the same caution I give to wet floors and black ice. He was also, and I say this as someone who tried very hard to see the best in him for 7 years, a man who had never been told no by anyone he respected. His father had built that into him the way you build load-bearing walls. You don't notice until something shifts and suddenly the whole structure is wrong. I liked Gregory well enough at first. He was polite to me. He remembered my birthday. He called me by my first name, which was Nola, and which I had told him he could use. and which I slightly regretted telling him because it turned out he said it in a way that made it sound like a small condescension. "Clement, I never liked. Not from the first dinner." He shook my hand when we met and looked past my shoulder the entire time, the way some men do when they're deciding whether you're worth the full attention. He asked what I did, and when I told him I was semi-retired but had spent 22 years running a residential property management company, he nodded slowly, the way people do when the answer is less impressive than they'd hoped. He asked about my daughter's father, meaning my ex-husband, and when I said we'd been divorced since my daughter was 9, something shifted behind his eyes. Not cruelty, just filing, like he was categorizing information and had put us in a particular drawer. My daughter's name went on the company as a minority shareholder 2 years into the marriage. Gregory's idea, or so she thought. She ran their residential property division from the Hamilton office. She was good at it. She brought in 3 new condo management contracts in her first year. She hired a small team. She thought she was building something. She was. She just didn't know who owned the foundation. I have a friend named Dolores who retired from the Niagara Regional Police after 30 years, the last 8 in financial crimes. We've been friends since our daughters were in the same skating program in the 90s. She is the godmother of my youngest granddaughter. She makes the best Nanaimo bars I've ever eaten, and she has eyes like a hawk and a memory like a courthouse filing system. I called her this Saturday evening after I picked my daughter up from the parking lot. "Tell me what you know about cold storage logistics," I said. "I know it's regulated," she said, "and I know it's the kind of industry where the paper trails are either very clean or very dirty, and not much in between." Why? I told her about the board, about the restructuring claim, about the fact that my daughter's name was on a minority share agreement she'd never had independent legal advice on before signing. Dolores was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did she get anything in writing when they let her go?" "A letter." "She has it. Scan it to me." "I'm 67, Dolores. I don't scan things." "Take a picture and text it." I did. She called back 20 minutes later. "This is not a restructuring letter," she said. "This is a termination for cause dressed up in polite language. There's a clause in here waiving her right to severance if she signs." "She hasn't signed it." "Good. She should not sign it. Tell her to not sign anything until she talks to an employment lawyer." "Do you have one?" I had one. I had one because 22 years in property management means 22 years of learning who to call and when, and one of the things you learn is that a good lawyer on retainer is cheaper than being caught without one. I called her Sunday morning. She told me to come in Monday with everything my daughter had: the shareholder agreement, the employment contract, the termination letter, 3 years of pay stubs, any emails she'd saved. My daughter had saved everything. That's one thing Gregory had never understood about her. She is meticulous. She keeps records the way some people keep grudges, carefully, indefinitely, in labeled folders. The appointment Monday morning was in a building on James Street North in Hamilton, which I have always liked because there's a good coffee shop on the ground floor, and I find that good coffee before a difficult meeting is both practical and symbolic. The lawyer's name was Renata, and she was 50-something with reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on, and she read every document twice before she said anything. What she said was, "This shareholder agreement has a buyout clause that is, to put it charitably, aggressively structured in the majority shareholder's favor." Meaning that if your daughter's employment with the company is terminated for any reason, including restructuring, including cause, including voluntary resignation, her shares revert to the company at book value, not fair market value. The difference, depending on how the books are currently structured, could be substantial. My daughter said, "So they get to fire me and take my shares." Renata said, "That's one way of reading it." "Is there another way?" "Not a particularly good one." My daughter looked at me. I looked at my coffee cup. Renata said, "However, there are several things here that concern me from the other direction." She took her glasses off again. "The agreement you signed lacks independent legal certificate. That means there's no record that you received independent legal advice before signing. In Ontario, that's not automatically fatal to the agreement, but it is a significant procedural weakness, particularly combined with the fact that you were an employee of the company at the time and in a position of unequal bargaining power. What does that mean in practice? I asked. It means we have grounds to challenge the enforceability of the buyout clause. It means we can argue unconscionability. And it means, she said, setting her glasses down on the desk, that before they do anything further with those shares, they should probably hear from us. She sent a letter that afternoon, registered mail and email both, to Clement Whitmore personally and to the company's corporate counsel. I drove home through the Niagara Escarpment, and the sun was coming in low over the vineyards, and everything looked gold and still, and my daughter fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere near Grimsby, and I thought about Clement Whitmore's face when that letter arrived, and I let myself feel, just briefly, something close to satisfaction. The letter did what letters like that are designed to do. It made people nervous. Clement called my daughter's cell phone twice that week. She didn't answer. On Renata's advice, Gregory texted twice. She didn't answer those either. Also on Renata's advice, the company's corporate counsel sent a response that was several pages of careful language amounting to the position that the agreement was valid and the termination was lawful, and perhaps we'd like to reconsider our characterization of events. Renata responded with 3 additional paragraphs and a request for the company's complete financial records from the past 5 years, citing my daughter's status as a shareholder of record. That was when things got interesting, because when Dolores, who had spent 30 years looking at financial documents, looked at what the company produced in response, which was incomplete, delayed, and organized in a way she described as the paper equivalent of hiding things in plain sight, she started asking different questions. "Your daughter's division," she said to me one evening over the phone, "was profitable. Considerably profitable. But the way the internal accounting is structured, that profitability gets absorbed into a parent cost center before it ever touches the line items that determine her share value." Say that in English. They've been cooking the books, not dramatically, not stupidly, but the residential property division your daughter built has been generating revenue that never shows up where it should, which means her shares are worth far less on paper than they would be if the accounting reflected reality. I said, "Can you prove that?" "I'm retired," she said, "but I know people who aren't." I want to pause here and say something I mean. I am not a vindictive woman. I've been described that way by people who don't know me, and also once by my ex-husband in a moment of frustration that I think embarrassed him afterward. But I am not. I have spent 67 years learning that anger, held onto, becomes something that eats the container first. I am not interested in revenge for its own sake, but there is a difference between revenge and consequence. And what I believed, what Dolores and Renata and eventually a forensic accountant from a firm in Mississauga all believed, was that Clement Whitmore had engineered a system designed to ensure that my daughter would get nothing for the years she'd spent building something real, that he had looked at her, at our family, at what we were and where we came from, and decided that we were not entitled to what the work was worth. I have a specific kind of patience for that, the kind that doesn't feel like patience from the outside. The Employment Standards Tribunal hearing was scheduled for late April. Renata had filed 2 separate complaints, one for wrongful dismissal, one related to the shareholder agreement, and there was a parallel matter now with a forensic accountant in a letter to the CRA that I will not describe in full because it is still ongoing and I have been advised to be careful. What I can say is this. 3 days before the April hearing, the company's corporate counsel called Renata. He wanted to discuss settlement. Renata told me afterward that he sounded like a man who had not slept recently and was hoping no one could tell. We settled 2 weeks later. I will not share the specific number because my daughter asked me not to, and I respect that. What I will say is that it covered the mortgage, covered her legal fees, covered a reasonable transition period, and included a clause requiring the company to correct the accounting irregularities in her division's historical records, which was, for me, the part that mattered most, because it meant the record existed. It meant someone had to look at what had actually been built and acknowledge it. Gregory called my daughter the week after the settlement. She answered that time. I don't know everything he said. She came out of her bedroom afterward and sat at my kitchen table and made herself a cup of tea and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "He said his father was the one who pushed to terminate me. He said he argued against it." I said, "Maybe that's true. Does it matter?" I thought about it. Probably not in the way he wants it to, but maybe in some other way. Eventually. She wrapped both hands around her mug, which is something she's done since she was small, and she looked out the window at the backyard, which still had the remnants of the March snow piled against the fence. "What do I do now?" she said. "What do you want to do?" "I want to start my own thing. Property management. I have the contacts. I have the experience. I have." She stopped. I was going to say I have nothing to lose, but that's not true anymore. "No," I said, "it isn't." She registered the business name 6 weeks later. She took 2 of the condo contracts with her. Both clients chose to follow her rather than stay with the Whitmore company, which says something, I think, about what she built and who'd built it. She hired one of her former employees, a young woman who'd been with her since the beginning and who also, it emerged, had been keeping meticulous records of her own. I saw Clement Whitmore once more after all of this. It was in September, at a regional business event at a winery in Pelham. I hadn't known he'd be there. These things happen in a region this size. He was standing near the bar when I walked in. He saw me before I saw him. By the time I noticed him, he had already set his glass down and made a decision about where to look, which was not at me. I got myself a glass of Riesling, local, the way I prefer, and I found a seat near the window where the light came in warm over the vines. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say and nothing left to prove and nowhere to put whatever either of us might have said. But I'll tell you something I noticed from across the room. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just smaller in the way that people sometimes look when the story they've been telling about themselves has developed some cracks and the light is getting in through the wrong places. I finished my wine and I drove home along the escarpment road with the windows down and the late summer air coming in. And I thought about my daughter in her new office in a building she chose herself, and my granddaughter, who had recently informed me with great authority that she wanted to be a marine biologist, and Dolores, who was probably at home making Nanaimo bars and watching her crime documentary programs, and the forensic accountant who had asked good questions and gotten good answers, and Renata, who had sent registered letters and not flinched. I thought about the bench outside the Tim Hortons. My daughter's hands around that cup she wasn't drinking. I thought about how I'd known, the moment I saw her, exactly what needed to happen next. Not because I'm remarkable, because I'm 67 years old and I've been paying attention for a long time. That's the thing they never account for. The ones who look at women like me and see someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone who can be managed and overlooked and filed away. They forget that we've been watching too. That we've had decades to learn the difference between noise and signal, that we know which calls to make and when to make them. We don't announce it. We don't need to. We just get in the car. I've been thinking about what Clement Whitmore actually believed when he signed off on that termination letter. I think he believed it was over. I think he looked at my daughter, a woman who came from a divorced household, whose mother ran a property management company that was never going to make any newspaper's business section, and he decided that the math was simple, that we would take the letter, feel the weight of it, and go quiet, that we didn't have the resources or the knowledge or the nerve to do anything else. He wasn't entirely wrong about the resources. He was entirely wrong about everything else. That's the thing about people who accumulate power through systems they've inherited rather than built. They tend to mistake familiarity with intelligence. Clement knew how to work the structure his father had left him. He knew the right lawyers and the right accountants and the right way to make a paper trail look clean from a distance. What he didn't know, what he had never needed to know, was how to deal with someone who had spent 22 years learning those same systems from the outside. Learning them precisely because no one was going to hand her anything from the inside. I built my company without a family name behind it. I learned contract law because I couldn't always afford to call a lawyer for every question. I built a network of people I trusted. Dolores, Renata, others. Not because I was strategic about it in any calculated sense, but because I had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that the quality of the people around you is the only real protection there is. Not money, not status, people who pick up the phone on a Saturday evening and say, "Send me the document. What happened to my daughter was not fair." I want to say that plainly, because I think sometimes these stories get told in a way that makes the outcome seem inevitable, like justice is a system that runs on its own. It doesn't. Clement's plan very nearly worked. If my daughter had signed that letter in the first 48 hours, if she had been frightened enough, or exhausted enough, or simply alone enough, the clause would have stood and the shares would have reverted, and the years she'd spent building that residential division would have been absorbed into a company that never intended to give her credit for any of it. She didn't sign it. That was her decision, made alone, in 2 days I didn't know about. I give her full credit for that, and I think about what it cost her to wait, to sit on that bench with her daughter and her suitcases and her $400, and not call me. She was protecting something. Her pride, maybe, or her sense that she should be able to handle her own life. I understand that. I raised her to be that way. I just hope she also learned from watching what came after, that knowing who to call and when to call them is not weakness. It's the sharpest tool I own. The consequence for Clement was not dramatic. There was no courtroom moment, no public reckoning, no scene at the winery in Pelham where I said something pointed and memorable. Life mostly doesn't work that way. What there was, instead, was a settlement he hadn't planned on, an accounting correction that put certain things permanently on record, and a daughter-in-law who left his company and took the clients who mattered with her. That's how it actually works, I think. Not in grand gestures. In corrections. In records that exist. In the quiet, durable fact of what my daughter built next. Her own business, her own name on the door, her own decisions from the start. She earned that. So did the people who helped her get there. I'm 67 years old. I have made a great many mistakes, and I will probably make more. But I have learned reliably that the people who underestimate quiet women of a certain age are doing themselves a disservice that will, in time, become apparent to everyone, including them. We've just had longer to prepare. They called my son 31 times. 31 times the hospital phone rang out into the cold Ontario air, and 31 times nothing. Not a voicemail, not a text, not even the small dignity of a declined call. Just silence over and over again, while I lay in a hospital bed in Thunder Bay with wires taped to my chest and a surgeon waiting for my next of kin to sign a form. That's how I found out who my son really was. Not through an argument, not through a slow, painful realization over years, but through 31 unanswered calls on a Tuesday afternoon in February. My name is Patricia, and I'm 67 years old. I was born and raised in Thunder Bay, Ontario, the kind of place where people still hold doors open for strangers and bring casseroles when someone dies. I worked as an administrative coordinator for the Lakehead District School Board for 34 years. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband Gerald passed away from a stroke when the kids were still young. My son Nathan was 12, and my daughter Renee was 9. I gave those children everything I had. I worked double shifts in summer. I skipped dentist appointments so they could have hockey equipment. I drove Nathan to practice at 5 in the morning in -30 weather without a single complaint because I believed that's what a mother does. Gerald left us a modest life insurance policy and a small house on Balmoral Street that I paid off by the time Nathan turned 20. For 30 years, I kept that house. I raised my children in it. I buried a cat in the backyard. I planted the same rose bushes every spring, even when the frost killed them. That house was not just a property to me. It was the physical proof that I had kept our family together after the worst thing that had ever happened to us. When I retired at 64, I made a practical decision. The house was too large for one person. The heating bills in the Thunder Bay winter are not something to take lightly, and my knees were telling me that another decade of shoveling that long driveway was not in the cards. I sold the house for $340,000, a number that still makes me blink when I think about it, because I remember when Gerald and I bought it for $48,000 in 1987. The real estate market had been kind to me, and I was grateful. I moved into a comfortable two-bedroom apartment on Court Street, close to the waterfront, close to my doctor, close to everything I needed. I put the proceeds in a GIC at my credit union while I figured out what to do with them. I was not a wealthy woman, but for the first time in my adult life, I had a cushion. I had options, and that felt like more than I had expected from this life. Nathan knew about the sale. Of course he did. He had called me the week I listed the house. The first unsolicited call in 4 months, I noticed, asking me to think carefully about what I was going to do with the money. He had a business idea. He was always between business ideas. In the last 5 years, he had tried a pressure washing company, a cryptocurrency investment club, and a landscaping operation that lasted 1 season. He was 40 now, living in Mississauga with his girlfriend Tamara and her 2 children from a previous relationship. He worked in sales, though the details of what he sold seemed to shift every time I asked. I told Nathan I needed time to think. He told me I was sitting on a gold mine and that he had a plan that could double what I had in 18 months. I told him I would think about it. I did not tell him that I had absolutely no intention of handing my retirement savings to a man who had never once balanced a checkbook successfully in 4 decades of life. Renee was different. Renee lived 40 minutes away in Nepean, worked as an early childhood educator, and called me every Sunday. Not because she wanted anything, just because she was Renee. She drove down once a month to take me grocery shopping because she knew my left knee was bothering me and the parking lot at the Safeway was icy in winter. She remembered that I liked the dark roast coffee from the Ukrainian bakery on Red River Road, and she brought me a bag every time she came. She had her mother's stubborn love for ordinary things done with care. I will be honest with you. For the first year after the house sale, things between Nathan and me were tense, but manageable. He asked about the money twice more, and I redirected both conversations. He stopped calling quite as often. I told myself this was normal, that adult children get busy, that I should not read too much into it. And then came the second Tuesday of February. I had been feeling off for a few weeks, tired in a way that sleep did not fix, a tightness in my chest when I climbed the stairs that I had been quietly ignoring, the way you do when you are 67 and you have learned that acknowledging every ache leads to a spiral of worry. I had an appointment booked with my GP for the following week. I told myself I would mention it then. I did not make it to that appointment. I was at St. Andrew's United Church. It was the midweek fellowship lunch they hold every Tuesday for seniors. Soup and sandwiches and conversation, the kind of small social infrastructure that keeps people like me from disappearing into their apartments entirely. I was sitting at a table with my friend Dorothy and 2 women I had met through the church's bereavement group, and I was in the middle of a sentence about the new transit road on Memorial Avenue when everything went sideways. The pain was not what I expected. Films always show heart attacks as this dramatic, crushing, drop-to-your-knees event, and mine was quieter than that and worse. A pressure behind my sternum, like something enormous, was leaning against my chest from the inside. My left arm went strange. Dorothy later told me I had gone the color of old newspaper. I remember reaching for the edge of the table. I remember the sound of chairs scraping. I remember Dorothy's voice, very close and very calm, saying, "Pat, I'm calling 911 right now. Stay with me." I do not remember much after that until the hospital. The paramedics had me at Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center within 11 minutes. I was having a heart attack, a significant one, they told me later, involving the left anterior descending artery. I was taken into emergency surgery. But before that, there were forms, decisions to be made. A surgeon who needed to speak to family. The nurse at admissions looked through my wallet for an emergency contact. Nathan was listed. He had been listed there for 12 years, since Gerald died, and I updated everything in a grief-numbed afternoon of paperwork. I had never changed it because it had never occurred to me that I would need to. The nurse called Nathan at 1:47 in the afternoon. He did not answer. She called again. He did not answer. By the time they had called him 31 times over the next 4 hours, I was already out of surgery and in the ICU. The surgical team had made the decision to proceed without family consent because waiting was not an option. I was alive because of that decision, and because of the speed of the paramedics, and because Dorothy had known exactly what was happening and had not wasted a single second. I woke up the following morning with tubes in my arm and a view of the gray February sky through a window that needed cleaning. Renee was asleep in the chair beside my bed. She had driven down from the peak on the previous evening after Dorothy had tracked down her number through the church directory. Renee had sat with me through the night. She had spoken to the cardiologist. She had called my pharmacist about my medications. She had done all of it without being asked, without fanfare, the way she did everything. When I was coherent enough to understand what had happened, I asked Renee about Nathan. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told me. The hospital had reached him. Eventually. Not through the calls. He had not answered those. They had reached him because Renee, after getting off the phone with Dorothy the previous evening, had called Nathan herself. He had answered her call on the second ring. He told her he had been in back-to-back meetings and had his phone on silent. He said he would try to get up to Thunder Bay in the next few days if things cleared up. He asked Renee how serious it was. When she told him it had been emergency cardiac surgery, he said, "Okay, wow," and then asked whether I had said anything about my finances recently. I want you to sit with that for a moment. His mother had emergency heart surgery. 31 calls went unanswered. And his first instinct, once he confirmed I was alive, was to ask about the money. Renee did not tell me this story all at once. She told it carefully, the way you tell a sick person something difficult, watching my face, pausing between pieces of it. She held my hand the entire time. When she finished, I stared at the ceiling for a long while and did not say anything. I was in the hospital for 9 days. Renee stayed for the first 4, sleeping on a cot the nurses brought in, eating crackers and peanut butter from the vending machine down the hall, taking notes during every conversation with the medical team so she could relay it back to me accurately. Her partner, Paul, drove down on the weekend with clean clothes for her and a container of borscht from the Ukrainian bakery, the kind I liked. And he sat with me for 2 hours so Renee could go outside and breathe fresh air for the first time in days. Nathan arrived on day 6. He came on a Saturday morning, wearing a new-looking jacket, smelling of the kind of cologne that announces itself before you do. He hugged me carefully, the way people hug someone they are slightly afraid of. He sat in the chair across from the bed and said all the right things, that he was so sorry, that he had been out of his mind with worry, that he should have been there sooner. I listened. I did not argue. I had spent 6 days in a hospital bed with nothing to do but think, and I had done a great deal of it. Nathan stayed for 1 night at a hotel downtown. He came back Sunday morning, had a coffee from the cafeteria, and then while Renee had stepped out to make a phone call, he leaned forward and said he had been thinking about my situation. He said that recovering from a heart attack was expensive, that I would probably need home support, that the stress of managing a large sum of money on my own might not be great for my recovery. He had been doing some research. There was a business opportunity, a distribution partnership that he believed in strongly. If I could give him access to $150,000, he was confident he could turn it into something significant for both of us. I looked at my son for a long moment. I thought about 31 phone calls. I thought about Renee sleeping in a cot for 4 nights, eating crackers from a vending machine. I thought about Paul driving 4 hours to bring borscht. I thought about Dorothy, who had not left my side until the ambulance had taken me away, who had called Renee herself, who had brought me flowers on day 3. I said, "Nathan, I'm tired. I think I need to rest now." He left that afternoon. He sent me a text 2 days later that said, "Let me know when you're feeling up to talking more about things." I did not respond. I was discharged on a Wednesday with a folder full of instructions, medications, dietary changes, cardiac rehabilitation schedule, restrictions on lifting and exertion. Renee drove me home and helped me get settled. She had already been to my apartment earlier that week to stock the fridge with the foods I was now supposed to eat and to put a grab bar in the bathroom. She had not told me she was going to do it. She had just done it. That first week home was quiet. I had a lot of time to sit by my window and watch the ice on the waterfront and think about things. I thought about the fact that I was 67 years old and I had just had a serious heart attack and I had used up one of whatever number of near misses a person gets. I thought about the fact that the person listed as my emergency contact had not answered his phone 31 times while I was in surgery. I thought about the fact that within a week of that surgery, that same person had asked me for $150,000. I thought about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. And I thought about something I had done quietly. 4 months earlier, on a gray October afternoon when I had driven to my lawyer's office on Algoma Street and sat across from her for 2 hours and redone my will entirely. I had not done it because of any single incident. I had done it because I had been paying attention, slowly and reluctantly, for several years. Because of the pattern of calls that came only when Nathan needed something. Because of the business ideas and the loans that were never repaid, $12,000 over the years, which I had stopped counting at some point because the counting made me feel foolish. Because of Renee, who asked for nothing and gave everything, and who deserved to have that acknowledged in a permanent way. My lawyer had been straightforward with me. She had helped me restructure everything clearly. The apartment contents, the car, and the full balance of the house sale proceeds were directed to Renee. There was a bequest of $500 to Nathan, which my lawyer explained was a standard amount used to acknowledge a person formally in a will while leaving them nothing of substance, enough to establish that the omission was deliberate, not an oversight. I had not told anyone. Not Renee. Not Dorothy. No one. I had driven home from that appointment, made myself a cup of tea, and gone on with my life. After the hospital, once I was home and steady on my feet, I called my lawyer to review whether anything needed updating. It did not. Everything was as I had left it in October. She confirmed the documents were valid and registered. Then I started making other plans. My cardiologist had been clear that stress management was now a medical priority, not a lifestyle suggestion. She had given me a referral to a cardiac rehabilitation program and had mentioned, somewhat pointedly, that patients who made meaningful life changes after cardiac events had significantly better outcomes than those who returned to exactly the same circumstances. I took her words seriously. I contacted a travel agent, a real one, the kind with an office, because I am 67 and I prefer it that way, and began looking at a trip I had been postponing for 20 years. Newfoundland. Gerald had always wanted to go to Newfoundland. He had a postcard of the Growmorn Cliffs on his office wall for the entire time I knew him. I had kept that postcard in a shoebox since he died. I thought it was time. I booked a 10-day trip for late May. A small guided group through the national parks, the coastal towns, the Viking settlement at Lansox Meadows. Comfortable hotels, moderate walking, no shoveling. I paid the deposit and felt something shift in my chest that was not a medical symptom. In March, Nathan called. He had heard, through some channel I did not investigate, that I had been looking into travel. He called on a Wednesday evening and started warmly, asking about my recovery, saying he had been thinking about me, that he wanted to do better about staying in touch. I let him talk. After about 10 minutes, he circled around to the point. He said he was concerned about me spending large sums of money while I was still in recovery mode. He said that financial decisions made after health scares could be impulsive. He wondered if it might make sense for me to add him to my account so he could keep an eye on things. I said very calmly that I appreciated his concern and that my finances were being handled responsibly with the guidance of my financial advisor and my lawyer, and that I felt confident in my arrangements. There was a pause. He said, "Mom, I'm just trying to help." I said, "I know." Then I said, "Nathan, I love you. But I've been thinking a great deal about the last few years and about what happened in February, and I have realized that I need to make my health and my peace of mind the priority from now on. I don't think our relationship is in a place that supports that right now. I need some distance." He started to object. I let him say what he needed to say, and then I told him I was going to go and get some rest, and I wished him well, and I said goodbye. I sat by the window for a long time after that call. The sun was going down over the waterfront, turning the ice this particular shade of orange that only happens in late March in northern Ontario. And it was one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. I sat there until it was fully dark, and then I made myself supper and took my medications and went to bed. I did not cry. I had done my crying in the hospital, quietly, in the early mornings before Renee woke up. I had grieved the version of Nathan I had hoped he would be, the one I had held on to for 40 years through every disappointment. I was not grieving anymore. I was just letting go. In May, I flew to Newfoundland. I saw the cliffs at Gros Morne on a clear morning when the light was coming off the water at an angle that made everything look like it was lit from inside. I stood there for a long time thinking about Gerald, about the postcard, about the 34 years I had lived since he died and everything I had carried through them. I thought about the fact that I had nearly not made it to this moment, that 31 phone calls had gone unanswered while I was on a surgical table, and that I was standing here anyway. I bought a postcard of those cliffs at the gift shop. I mailed it to Renee. On the back I wrote, "I finally made it. Thank you for everything. I love you, Mom." She called me that evening from her kitchen in Nipigon, and she cried a little, and I cried a little, and then we talked for an hour about the trip and about her students and about whether I would come up to Nipigon for the long weekend in August. I said yes. Renee does not know yet what is in my will. I have not told her because I do not want her to do what she does out of obligation or anticipation. I want her to keep calling me on Sundays and bringing dark roast coffee and driving me to appointments because that is who she is. And she will. I know that. What I know now at 67 after a heart attack and 31 unanswered calls and a surgical consent form signed without my family present is this: love is not a claim. It is not a birthright. It is not something owed to you by the circumstances of your birth or the fact of your name in someone's emergency contact field. Love is Dorothy at the fellowship lunch, knowing immediately what was happening and not wasting a single second. Love is Renee asleep in a cot eating crackers from a vending machine at 2 a.m. Love is Paul driving 4 hours with borscht because Renee needed clean clothes and I needed soup. I kept my $340,000, every cent of it. And I intend to use it to live the life I earned, quietly and on my own terms, for as many years as this repaired heart will carry me. Nathan called once more in June. I did not answer. I was on a whale-watching boat off the coast of Twillingate, Newfoundland, with a group of strangers who had become friendly over 10 days of shared meals and shared wonder. A humpback surfaced 30 feet from our boat, enormous and unhurried, and everyone on deck made the same sound at once, that involuntary exhale of pure astonishment that happens when the world shows you something it doesn't have to. I stood at the railing in the cold salt air and I thought, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. And I did not look at my phone again until we were back at the dock.